Good evening, everyone. Thank you for showing up. Actually, that's what, 90% of the path, 95% of the path is showing up. And our beautiful online community that's somewhere in back of that little box. And so wonderful and steady. We have people, that's 95% of the, what happened? Should I keep talking? I'm a little bit scared. Yeah. So who's here for the first time? We always ask this just so that we can say thank you. Welcome. Thank you for taking the plunge. Sometimes people come through and they've been practicing for 20 years and they're in Santa Fe, and so they come and be with us. And sometimes it's just, let's see what's this all about. And either way, it's great. Oh, hi, Maddie. Good to see you. So I'm going to talk about a teaching that I kind of rediscovered in Suzuki Roshi's new book. And it's something called Kanno Doko. And it's very hard to translate, but some of the ways it's translated is responsive communion, or even mystical communion, or appeal and response. And it's actually not a Japanese thing or a Buddhist thing even at all. It's a very human thing that points to our opening and our receptivity and our opening to something bigger than ourselves, and our kind of our longing to do that. And to bring us into this, I'm going to begin with a poem. It's a Wallace Stevens poem, which I will read twice. And it very beautifully and gently brings us into kind of the space of this, of what we're talking about. It's a poem about winter, by the way. One must have a mind of winter to regard the frost and the boughs of the pine trees crusted with snow, and have been cold a long time to behold the junipers shagged with ice, the spruces rough in the distant glitter of the January sun. And not to think of any misery in the sound of the wind, in the sound of a few leaves, which is the sound of the land, full of the same wind that is blowing in the bare place, for the listener who listens in the snow. And nothing herself beholds nothing that is not there, and the nothing that is. One must have a mind of winter to regard the frost and the boughs of the pine trees crusted with snow, and have been cold a long time to behold the junipers shagged with ice, the spruces rough in the distant glitter of the January sun. And not to think of any misery in the sound of the wind, in the sound of a few leaves, which is the sound of the land, full of the same wind that is blowing in the same bare place. For the listener who listens in the snow, and nothing herself beholds nothing that is not there, and the nothing that is. So to have a mind of winter or summer or spring, we just have to get quiet enough. Quiet enough to be in our experience, quiet enough to be our experience. Then it's like there's no resistance. There's nothing in between. Quiet enough not to add anything and not to make anything. Quiet enough to listen so deeply that we receive completely the world as it is and ourselves with no separation. Quiet enough that, as Dōgen writes in Genjo Koan, the myriad things come forth and actualize the self. One must have a mind of winter to regard the frost in the boughs of the pine trees crusted with snow. So there's a lot. There's a lot involved and nothing involved actually in having a mind of winter. It's kind of everything that we learn to slough off. And this experience of this kind of receptivity is something that I think everyone knows and reaches and is called to in some way or other. And it could be a 50-mile bike ride and you're just there with the wind. Or it could be my hiking buddy who on her favorite trail goes down to her tree and puts her face right there and takes a big breath. And there's no tree, there's just this communion. So for all of us, there's something that prompts us to let go and receive the world in this way and to be in this kind of mystical union. And I think it's so much part of our humanity to be in this vast mystery and just to let go into this kind of an experience that we know in our gut, but we can't really explain very well. So I was reminded of this teaching in Suzuki Roshi's new book. And he writes this: because we have so much useless rubbish in our mind, it's hard to share our feeling with people, with things, with trees, or with mountains. Even though we're right in the middle of the woods, it's still hard to appreciate the feeling of the woods. When we can really appreciate the feeling of the woods, that is Zazen. And Thich Nhat Hanh expresses it this way: if we cannot feel the rivers, the mountains, the air, the animals, and other people from within their own perspective, the rivers will die and we will lose our chance for peace. When we understand something, when we want to understand something, we cannot just stand outside and observe it. We need to enter deeply into and to be one with it in order to really understand. So all of this is starting to circle around this teaching of Kanno Doko. And as I said, it can be translated as mystical communion, which seems a little airy, responsive communion, call and response between us and Buddha, between us and all beings, and sometimes between us and particular beings like my good friend and her trees. And I think like there's somewhere in our gut that we know this feeling. I think that indigenous people all around the globe know this, and we've moved from it, particularly when we're far from the earth and far from our roots. So this particular teaching of Kanno Doko has its roots in ancient China. And one of the Chinese founders of the Tiantai school wrote this. And this is, I'm going to circle around in several ways to kind of try to get to the middle of this. But he wrote, Buddha does not come, and sentient beings do not go to Buddha. Yet they meet through the person's inquiry and Buddha's response. This is subtle mystical communion. And at least for me, and I think maybe for us in our Buddhist tradition, it's interesting, like it's easier from my Christian background to think of asking God and God responding. But how do we feel that Buddha responds? What is that for us? So Kanno Doko, it's Kannodoko, if you want to kind of explore more later. And this kan is to perceive or intuit something, or call or appeal. So an intuitive, empathic reaching out or calling out. And Kanno is responsiveness. So Kanno is intuitively perceiving a response, reaching and intuitively perceiving a response from the universe, from a particular being. And then Doko, Do is way or path, and Ko is joining or communion. So when we sit in receptivity, our Buddha nature is right there with our sentient being nature, but those are just kind of ideas and concepts and a little bit hard to reach. But we just have to really get quiet enough and have a deep enough aspiration for awakening. This is part of the call, this aspiration. So when we sit down in Zazen, every time we sit down at Upaya, we recall our intention. And I think this is that part of the call, the opening, the response. We bring our heart and mind and deep desire for all beings to be free from suffering. And this is our reaching out with our intention that we and others may be free from suffering, and that we may realize our true nature and our oneness. And we need to release the idea that our small, separate self is in charge of the world, which is very hard to do. The world according to Nanette, I like it. I want it. So like all the ways that we narrow and define, we have to release that in order to receive this kind of response. And open the hand of thought and release our grasping and chasing after things. And that creates the space for this communion, this call and response is our very receptivity and also our humility. So on a practical level, even though this mystical communion sounds kind of airy and undefinable, I think we do know that if we're just tumbling along according to the world, according to Nanette, our karmic self-centered tendencies, and chasing after what we think we want, and trying to bargain our way out of what we don't want, nothing changes. And we feel this sense of incompleteness or unsatisfactoriness that is a dukkha. And then when we've had enough of it, we stop and recognize and kind of can have the space to hear this yearning for freedom from suffering. And we're open to this reaching out. And it comes in so many ways. So in our tradition, in the Zendo, when we light incense, we're inviting, we're opening to hear, we're inviting what we think of as our Buddha nature. Or when we look up at the sky, or walk out among the trees, or pray, there's this invocation, may all beings be safe and free from suffering. And this is the call. This is the call. The Song of the Jewel Mirror Awareness says, the meaning is not in the words, yet it responds to inquiring impulse. Inquiry and response come up together. Dōgen Zenji describes Kanno Doko this way. The aspiration for awakening arises in the mystical communion between Buddhas and sentient beings. And this part was really helpful to me. He says it's not given by Buddhas or Bodhisattvas, and it's not created by oneself. And it doesn't simply arise spontaneously. So it's not created by some great being. It's not created by me. And it doesn't just happen. It's call and response. It's this reaching out, which is met. And in a sense, it's met because it's already there. But we have to stop and quiet and call. So as I said, I was reminded of this teaching in Suzuki Roshi's new book, and he writes about Kanno Doko, and he says this, in terms of conscious awareness, Kanno Doko happens for us in this way. We feel some coherence, interrelationship, or correspondence between Buddha and ourselves. Although we feel that way, originally, there's no difference between Buddha nature and human nature. So it's more than a responsive communion or relationship, but in our conscious awareness or in our experience, it feels like that. To take refuge in Buddha means we become one with Buddha, or to find our true nature, which is not different from Buddha. Kanno Doko is a resonance between our aspiration for awakening and the actual already awakened nature of everything, which is why it can be a tree or the sky or an animal or in the Zendo. What it takes for us to receive is humility and to be quiet enough to receive, to allow ourselves to be available. And it's kind of risky, feels risky sometimes because we're letting go of the tight way that we hold our word and describe our word, but the world. But there's this willingness to align with things as it is, to align and to just join in. And in response to this willingness, our Buddha nature permeates our lives, and we can move through our daily lives just with more harmony and more attention and more care. This is really what we call, I think, another description of what we call awakening or enlightenment, which is hard because it sounds fancy, but it's just this easeful, natural, loving way to express our humanity and to move in the world as who we truly are. And therefore, we're more able to face the tremendous challenges of our world with a flexible, creative, loving mind and heart. And we kind of are not putting our idea of ourselves between us and the universe. So I'm thinking about, we have this story of Shakyamuni Buddha's awakening. And I think about what it is when he looked up and saw the morning star after giving himself up with love and determination and saying, I will not get up from this spot until I wake up. And he looked up and he saw the morning star. What was that? What was that? If not that very same call and response. And also, Mahakashapa, the Buddha holds up a flower and Mahakashapa smiles. And everybody else is maybe like, meh, So some kind of call and response. So throughout our Zen literature, this comes up. And one of the people who wrote quite a bit about this is Katagiri Roshi. So I'm going to read you some of his words, which were very helpful also. He says, the spiritual communion between Buddha and the practitioner, the Buddha and you, is the interacting communion of appeal and response. When we look up to the sky and pray, we don't know what space is, but spiritually, in a deep sense, we understand what space is. Then the response comes from the whole universe. If we feel the spirit of the universe completely and appeal for help, or appeal that we may come alive in our everyday life, then very naturally we can be one with the universe. In other words, if we reach out our hands to the universe sticks out its own hand to us. And the path of your life, and this is still Katagiri Roshi, and this part is beautiful. So we reach out our hands, the universe sticks out its own hands to us, and the path of your life and the path of the universe cross each other. They align, they become one, interconnected. We can feel peaceful because our presence and the presence of the universe are exactly in the same place. And this is what we call wholeheartedness, or with all your mind. This sense of call and response is shared, I think, maybe by all, but at least by many, many spiritual traditions. So I'm just going to bring one example in. And I think in all the traditions, it involves a deep humility and a recognition that we don't do anything alone, that we need the collaboration of all of life, that everything is supporting us. So Anshin, one of our residents, did a class on the Sandokai. And in the last class, he brought in the words of some Christian mystics. And we had this great moment because part of one of the quotes talked about waiting for God. And I was there like, what do you mean waiting? No. We don't wait. Waiting is waiting, and presence is presence. And I had this kind of like energy around it. And another Sangha member said something that was really quite beautiful, that kind of brought me in a little bit to this waiting thing that I thought was kind of off the mark. But it became so clear to me in this particular investigation of Kanno Doko, or call and response, what that was actually pointing to. And so I got on my little computer and looked for some of the teachings of Simone Weil in her writing about waiting for God. And I'll read a couple things. One is from my search, and one is what Anshin brought in. She writes, "We cannot take a single step toward heaven. It is not in our power to travel in a vertical direction. If, however, we look heavenward for a long time, God comes and takes us up." How is that not the same thing? We're free only to change the direction of our glance. We cannot walk into heaven. We cannot rise without being lifted by grace. And she also writes, and this is a little bit, it's not even true that it's more aligned, but more in the language that we're used to in our Zen Buddhism. She says, attention consists of suspending our thought, leaving it detached, empty, and ready to be penetrated by the object. Above all, our thought should be empty, waiting, not seeking anything, but ready to receive in its naked truth the object that is to penetrate it. Empty, waiting, not seeking anything. And I think that most of us can sense this communion, and we know what it is, at least in some moments, to reach out to something that is vaster. I think we have this yearning to reach out for something that is vaster and to know that that's who we are. So I was really interested in looking at this, but as is my way, I said, and so what, you know? Because it can sound like chasing bliss, this kind of idea of a mystical communion. So are we chasing some special feeling? And for this, I go back to the words of Katagiri. It matters because the path of your life and the path of the universe cross each other in that kind of opening, and you're awake and you're aligned, and from there an appropriate response naturally arises. So the other thing to bring this into so what is some beautiful words from Joanna Macy. She writes, now it can dawn on us. We are our world, knowing itself. We are our world, knowing itself. We are our world, knowing itself. We can relinquish our isolation. We can come home again to a world that can appear to us now both as self and as lover, relating to our world with the full measure of our being. We partake in the qualities of both. We return to the experience that we are both the self and our world. We are not doomed to destroy it by the cravings of the separate ego and the technologies it fashioned. We can wake up to who we really are, allow the rivers to flow clean once more, and the trees to grow green along their banks. I believe that if we understand who we are, we can't help but make life-honoring choices. But we have to enter, we have to know that we have to be open to that experience of call and response and not be imposing ourselves. If we know who we are, we can't help but make life-honoring choices. And this is something we have to just keep waking up to. It's not, at least in my 77 years, it's not something that I can get once. I have to keep waking up to this truth. And we do this by stopping, quieting, attending, receiving, opening. And then because we know who we are, we have to respond to the cries of the world. We can't not. We have to respond. Because we have so much useless rubbish in our minds. It's hard to share our feelings with people and with things and with trees and with mountains, but we have to do it, and we have to sit with the useless rubbish in our mind and to appeal with humility and to bring our wholehearted effort to our life, which is all of life. And that's all I have for you. Thank you.